Hi, everybody. Uh, welcome to my presentation about the fashion of Rome. This is a project that I was working on for my Latin 497 class this semester, and we will be exploring the trends and the styles of Roman fashion from 753 BC to around 457 AD when the Roman Empire had fallen. This is just an overview of the paper that I wrote for this class. And yeah, so and we'll be looking at some like historical events that had shaped Roman fashion and just a little bit of like textile analysis is here and there. So here we have.
You make it full screen or not?
Oh, I can make it full screen, definitely. All right,
There
here we
we
go. So here we have our agenda. We'll be looking at culture and fabrics, the Roman kingdoms, the Roman Republic, and the Roman Empire. So, disclaimer, this does not cover everything and everything. This does not cover everything about ancient Roman fashion. Not gonna lie, some of my information might be a bit false. Some of the information that I'm giving is a bit scarce, partially because literally this was me. The final year was basically me this month. I could barely crack open a textbook. There are just some things I just did not want to like even read or look at, but just kind of just what happens when the burnout hits. So, anyways, culture and fabric. So wool is the most common fiber used in the Roman Empire and in the Roman times. It had both cultural and significant and religious significance, and there was many different types. So culturally and religiously, women were expected to weave and sew their husbands and their families' garments out of wool. So they would spin it, and they would make the togas, the tunics, the stolas, whatever they needed to make for their families. Religiously, most, if not all, religious garments from all the cults from ancient Rome wore wool. And I, from what I know, from what I researched, it had like because it came from a live animal, it had like some like property. It had like some like not magical, but like spiritual properties because of that. It was used from like things like military garments, as you see from military sheep over here. And you also see it from just fashionable garments, as you see from fashionable sheep over here. And if you look over here, there's like it's just an extant piece of Roman wool, and they can be woven in many different ways and many different thicknesses and like weaves. And something that is really good to know also is there's just some wool types that there's a lot of wool types. So British wools were very famous in the Roman Empire as they were very soft, they were fine, and they were very white. So during the second century, this is where the wools were produced from British Roman Britain. They were taken and exported to Rome because of their high quality. There was wool that was bred from a sheep and ram crossbreed that was very popular and that emerged in the first century AD. There's Phaeaxian wool. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Phyrexian wool. It was wool that was cut very close to the nap and then spun and woven and polished in a way where the wool, and these were used for togas mostly. They were spun and polished in a way where the wool looked very fine and very smooth and very soft. And something that people don't realize is that wool can actually spun very thin. This is an example of wool gauze. It's very fine. It's very translucent. And like today we think of like wools as like a very thick, heavy fabric used for coatings and sweaters, as you can tell by my sweater over here. Not the people watching this video, but the people in the audience, you guys can tell it can it's usually for us in the modern term, it's thick, but wool can be spun very finely even today. This wool is from an Italian Italian fabric store, and it retails for $30 a yard. So yeah, it's expensive. Silk, silk is probably one of the most famous fibers used in ancient Rome. It was introduced during the empire, and it was loved by many upper class men and women, and was hated by many conservative men. And depending on who was the emperor at the time, the usage of silk really just was dependent. So, you had like Augustus and you had Tiberius, who hated silk. Tiberius banned silk. Seneca the Elder, a very famous writer. This could be Seneca I think this is Seneca the Younger, a very famous like writer at this time, along with many writers, complained about the use of silk, as you can see by this lovely quote by him, really just going at it by the silk wearers. And then you have Nero and Epigalagus, don't know how to pronounce that name. They really, that name, they really love their silks, as you can see. They're also the crazy ones, but there's no correlation between those two things, craziness and love of silk. And also, just to also emphasize the fact that of the Roman upper class really loving silks, I have a TikTok to show everybody. I think this really really emphasizes the point of the Romans really loving their silk. Wait, sorry, that went. Where is my computer? All right, yeah. The Romans' love for silk literally almost bankrupts the empire multiple times, to the point where they had to actually set multiple laws in place trying to curb it to no one's avail. And all right, cotton. Cotton is another fiber that was very popular in Rome, was introduced probably in the 4th century and came from India mostly. It was known for taking dye better than other fibers like wool or linen. It was expensive, but it was cheaper than silks, and was woven with silks and to lower their costs, and with other fibers to also get that better dyeing and more neon color. Here we have a textile from a Roman Egypt, and it's an indigo dyed cotton, which is very well known from India. Indigo dyes were very popular. Indigo dyed cottons were very common coming from India, and these would have existed would have existed for probably since, like I said before, the 4th century BC. Yeah. Linen. Linen is the second most common fiber in ancient Rome. It was either produced locally or imported. We have extant linens. We have evidence of linens being imported from Egypt and from Egypt and from the East as far back as the 10th or the 11th century BC, very far before Rome was even founded. And the way we can actually tell the difference between locally spun and woven linens and imported linens is by the actual twist of the thread. So usually, depending on the tradition of the country or the culture you're from, it will dictate how you spin your threads. So many Mediterranean countries and cultures like Italy, or is now modern day Italy, would have spun their threads in the Z direction, as you can see over here. However, imported fabrics from the Far East and North Africa would have spun in the S direction. So when archaeologists and dress historians are looking at fabric samples, they can look at the fabric samples and tell where this fabric originated from just by the twist alone. So that's why we know that Romans from the beginning of their foundation had access to purple dyes, had access to trade in the Far East, had access to luxury goods. They had access to a lot of things since the beginning of its founding. Which is why like a lot of like the colors, the fabrics and the dyes don't really change that much because they already had it. But like when we get into the more of the empire stuff, we start seeing like bigger access to things. So culture. Like I said before, Roman women were expected to spin and weave garments for their husbands. Weaving was always associated with modesty. So here we have a quote from an epigraph, which is like basically just a funeral graph of like of a dedication to someone's mother. And with the word, like you can see over here, like weaving and spinning wool was always like associated with chastity, obedience, zeal, and loyalty. And that was always associated with being a good woman. Earlier in history, in the Roman Republic and the Roman kingdoms, most textile production and creation was centered around in the home. So women and slaves would spend time either weaving or overseeing the weaving of the family's garments. However, as we get more into the empire and there is more of there's less of like an at-home weaving industry and more of a commercialized weaving industry, or industry where it's more like people have their specialties have been developed. That like style of weaving and that style of weaving culture goes away. However, the idea of women just sitting there and just spinning their fabrics and their fibers is still a very major cultural ingrained cultural phenomenon. Another person that I feel like really empowers this is Lucretia. Lucretia is was a very famous woman in the Roman kingdoms. I'm not sure if she was a legendary person or a real person, but she was well known for being a very, very pious woman. And a way that was emphasized in Livy when he was talking about her was Lucretia's husband and his friends all had a contest to see who was the most pious out of all of their wives. And they all went out for the night and they came back, and all of his friends' wives were getting drunk and, having a good old time, just hanging out, having a girls' night out. Meanwhile, Lucretia was with her maidens or slaves, which they were most likely would have been slaves, and they were spinning wool and just weaving fabric in their house. And thus Lucretia won the competition that she did not even know was even going on, but still. And even then, like this is just another emphasis of like women spinning fabrics and weaving fabrics equals modesty in ancient Rome. So yeah. Influence is like another major thing. Please enjoy the memes. So Roman fashion had influence from the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Etruscans, the Parthians, the Germanic tribes, and these all like influenced how they wore their clothes, how they dressed, all of those fun things. So if you see over here, like, her jewelry, this woman's jewelry is very more from the Egyptians. Her undertunic is very Greek based. Her stola is more Etruscan based. These they all originate from a different culture that Rome either took over or was influenced by. Yeah. Now the Roman Republic. Roman Republic? What? Wait, why is it going into... Sorry, there's something really weird going on with this thing. It should not be saying the Roman Republic. This should say the Roman kingdoms for some reason. I don't know why, but the Roman kingdoms. So, what? Okay. Okay. I don't know what's going on with my thing. It's just acting weird. The perizomas. The perizomas. This was the most common. Oh, I should preface this. The Etruscans are the basic. Etruscan fashion is the basis for my research on the Roman kingdoms, and the reason why that is the case is because the Etruscans is what we have evidence for. They are a very local civilization that was near the Romans. Three of the Roman kings were of Etruscan descent, and they have a lot of commonalities with each other. The toga was from the Etruscans. The stola also somewhat originated from the Etruscans, but we'll get into that more. I just want to preface that like this is a lot of these things are from the Etruscans. A lot of these photos, a lot of the research is from Etruscan dress. So the perizoma is the most common garment seen for men between the 8th century to 600 BCE. And this garment is still worn in the empire, however, disappears from fashion as the perizoma becomes more of an undergarment. The perizoma alone is mostly just seen on young men, and it can be made out of patterned or plaid fabrics. And these could have been fastened with pins, buttons, ties, you name it. That's how they would have pinned it together. They could have been sewn together. There's evidence for a lot of these variations. Tunics is another common garment for older men, anyways, at this point. Scheme. Any Greek students in here? Can someone, the Greek student in here, can you pronounce this word for me? This word, I don't know how to. Kitoniskos. They're the ones that are seen by young men, but they're very rare. Older men tended to wear tunics with 3/4 length sleeves. And however, by the 6th century, we start seeing more and more tunics. And according to Pliny the Elder, this is where the latus clavi, as you see over here by this Roman man, was adopted by the Roman people from the Etruscans during the reign of King Tullus. I'm pretty sure he is one of the 3 Etruscan kings. And this was in the year 672 to 640 BCE. This is also over here is an example of a Chiski, whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't know how you pronounce it, but this is an example of one. Yes, it's a Greek drawing. I was too lazy to go and find an actual Etruscan one. Yeah. The date lapis clavi.
Yeah, what is that?
It's like the bands on the tunic as you see over here. Actually, I'm gonna come over here. As you see over here, it's just the bands on the Roman tunics. They come over here and they're just decoration. They do, according to Pliny, they are technically supposed to be worn by the equestrian tribes. However, there's evidence that this was not a thing. Also, it is up for debate. The Daedalic tunic was the most common tunic worn by women from the 8th to the mid-6th century. It was made out of plaid fabrics with tablet woven edges and designs. It consisted of a short sleeves with a narrow skirt. But post the 500s BCE, the Ionic tunic or the Ionic chiton was more in fashion. This is the Ionic tunic, as you see over here. It is clasped, it has gap sleeves and it's clasped on the front. And for the Greeks, it was not sewn on the sides, so you had side slits, but for the Romans, it was sewn on the sides. So you see here, I have censored areas because you can see things. The reason why I do that is because to emphasize the point that garments made in Rome and Greece, the fabrics were always very fine and very light, so you can see through the entire body, though it could also be for artistic representation. Mantles. So in the 7th century, thick plaid mantles were common for men, and it's also established in Pliny that King Tullus established the toga praetexta, which, if you guys don't know what that looks like, this is the toga praetexta over here. However, it is a bit up for debate because the toga or the toga precursor did not come into fashion until the mid-500s, and square mantles were still in fashion until the mid-500s. Now, women's mantles in the 7th century, black mantles were with claspings on the shoulders were the most common. There was another type of mantle which was like a cape-like raincoat mantle with holes on the arms to move through. And a feature of this mantle is that it has a Corinthian point, so it'll come down onto the sides with a point, and it was called the Corinthian point. I'm pretty sure the reason why it was called that was because this type of mantle was originated from the Corinthians. And now for the Tabena. So the Tabena is basically the precursor to the toga, and it's first seen around 550 BCE. It was initially worn by both sexes. There isn't that much physical evidence of women wearing it. From what I've seen. However, there is quotations from Pliny the Elder of him talking about Cloelia, a famous Roman kingdom girl. There was a statue of her in the Forum that was very old, and it's her depicted wearing the tabena. It disappears for women after the kingdom eras, but other sources say it disappears during the Second Punic Wars. And initially for men, it was worn without the tunic, and there's multiple different ways of wearing it. So as you see over here, the guy in the red sunglasses, he is wearing the tabena without the tunic. And over here, this is a Etruscan drawing on the bottom. There's multiple tabenas. I'm gonna just show you guys. This is a tabena. This is, I'm pretty sure, is a tabena, and there's multiple ways of just wearing that. And you can wear them like on the front, just covering your entire body as a Himation drape. There's a bunch of different drapes that you could wear it as. And yeah. So the Roman Republic. Finally, onto the actual Roman Republic. So the first, hi. So for the first roughly 200 years, it's kind of the same. The Ionic chiton is what is worn mostly by most Roman women. But however, in the 3rd century, the stola emerges. So it may have originated from Alexandria, Egypt, and it was originally called the vestis longa. So how it was described in Larissa Bonifant's book, Etruscan Dress, was that it's basically a sleeveless gown tied in the imperial empire style, which is basically, do you guys know what the Regency dresses look like? It's like over here, long skirt. That's basically what empire style means. And as you see over here in this very, very lovely carving that is, I'm sorry. This is the only only drawing I could find. Just, murder. You see the woman over here that's about to get stabbed. She is wearing what looks to be like a stola, and there is also evidence that the stola was originally worn without tunics, and that possibly is still something that's still a major thing, even into the empire. Initially, it was called the vestis longa, though the term stola comes later around the 1st century BCE, and that's probably due to when Greece was taken over by the Roman Republic. So the Second Punic Wars is probably the biggest turning point in Roman fashion. So during the Second Punic Wars, the Lex Opida is a law that was passed that restricted Roman women's dress. So Roman women could not wear purple. They can only own 1/2 ounce of gold. They couldn't ride in gilded carriages. And this is where the stola was said to have trickled down into lower classes. And even after Second Punic Wars was over, this law was still in place. And Roman women were not happy about it, as you can tell over here by this lovely little infographic that I made. So there is actually, in Pliny the Elder, there is a debate between Cato the Elder and Lucius Valerius. Cato wanted the Lex Opida to stay, while Lucius Valerius didn't want it to stay. And these are just like snippets from their speeches. However, I'll just summarize it for you because I don't want to read any of this. So basically the two arguments is that Cato the Elder describes women as with animalistic behaviors and as primitive, and he feels that the government needs to control women, and that saying that controlling their fashion will lessen disdain between women. And also, yes, that is the reason why I put Andrew Tate's photo on Cato the Elder's sculpture, because I think that really suits Cato the Elder, in my opinion. Lucius Valerius rebukes most of Cato's claims in less paragraphs. His is 1/2 a page. Cato's is 3 pages long. He emphasizes the fact that women do not have a lot of freedom in Rome, and emphasizes the shallowness of men, because Cato was like, women are so shallow. And then he was like, so are men. he there is also This is also one of the first times where we see women actually protesting against discrimination. And we do actually see, like, in some way, Roman women's voice being prominent in some ways, though we don't have any first person thoughts from them. We do know what they're thinking. And there is also, like, originally this law was passed so that Rome had money to fund the war, but at the same time, Roman women were actually getting a lot of power during this time because most men were off at war. And Roman women were starting to take roles in religion that previously was barred from them. They were helping the war effort by getting supplies and supporting and fundraising certain campaigns. So they were getting power, and a way to, for men to protect their power was to basically restrict them. And fun fact, this entire whole thing with the Lex Opera, the information that I got from it was somebody's master's degree thesis. So when I say that there is a lot of things I am skimming through a lot of things. So the outcomes of the Penal Court is also very important for fashion. Money, territory, and influence and power came into the Roman Republic's hands and allowed more buying power for Romans. And it also was important because Roman women's voice was this is the first time we see a Roman woman's voice being shown in history. But anyways, the toga. Sources go front and back, but they say by the 5th century or by the Punic Wars, the toga fell out for Roman women. From the early Republic, the toga was skimpy and could be woven in a singular loom, and it was very small. And Roman men started wearing the toga with a tunic in the 2nd or 3rd century BCE. So this is an example of a Roman toga. This is from a statue from around 100 BCE. It's called the Orator. And as you can see by his toga, it's actually not as full. It's very not thin. It's just very skimpy. And this is not a word that I even use. That's a word that a lot of other historians use. There are multiple types of toga. I will just only go through a couple of them. And yes, these are all imperial styles of togas. I could not find any Republican styles of these. So there's a toga praetexta, which is a toga made of unbleached wool with a purple stripe at the hem. That is the toga with the purple stripe over there. And this was worn by senators, children, and priests. There's a toga pura, which is a pure white toga that was worn by most adult men. And it's just either made of a white wool or just a plain wool. And it's a toga pulla, which is a black colored toga that was worn in mourning. However, during the late Republic, it was worn more frequently. So the 1st century BCE is kind of a hot mess for the Roman Republic, as you can tell by this very super accurate drawing of the 1st century BCE Roman Republic. There is a bit of a downgrade in culture in which all of these ideals of what Roman men should wear, what Roman women should wear, when to wear certain things, it's kind of just thrown out the window because Rome is going to shit at this point. You do see Roman men and women stop wearing the toga, and mourning clothes were worn as just daily wear, which kind of pissed off the more conservative groups. And we also see Greek clothing being more common and being more worn at this point. As you can see by this quote, I think this is from Varro, and he's just complaining about how Roman girls are not wearing the toga praetexta, but instead are just wearing all these Greek garments. I don't know what any of these garments are. I actually tried researching them, but nothing was coming up personally, but I'm pretty sure it was just sort of the gap weight, the gap sleeve, chitons, Himatians. I probably would also guess that there was probably what is it called again? The Ionic chiton might have also been worn. Those types of garments would have been more common in the Roman for these younger Roman girls. However, during the Roman Empire, um, we had the golden age of Augustus. Can somebody give me a time check also? Just want to make sure. Okay, we're making time. All right. All right. Um, Augustus tried to revitalize the Roman clothing culture, so he tried to make it mandatory for togas to be worn in public in certain spaces like the Forum, the Senate. He encouraged women to wear the stola, and this is an era where he basically solidified what the plebeians, the common people, us today think of like what traditional Roman fashion was, the toga and the stola. It was his work and emphasis on these garments that made the toga and the stola like the a very important garments. And this is where we see in a lot of writings toga-clad people being used to describe Romans. So like Virgil in his Aeneid, other writers, they will use this term to describe the Romans. So the imperial toga was a lot bigger. It was draped similar to the Himation. So and there's a development of a sinus and an umbo, as you can see by this drawing. So over here, I don't know why this got cut off, but over here we have the Republican style toga. It's basically just a half semicircle. And then we have over here the imperial style toga. So over here, this big trapezoidal shape, that is the sinus. The sinus would have been, the toga would have would have started over here and it would have been folded in half. It would have been draped all over the body and then come back up here. And then this little bottom half that was on your right shoulder would have poked out, and this would become the umbo, whatever the hell you call it. But during the Flavian and the Nerva dynasty, the togas become narrower and shorter because this toga is very hard to walk in. There is evidence of Nero and Caligula being embarrassed from tripping over their togas, as they should. They should be embarrassed, for burning down Rome and stuff. You guys saw the meme in the beginning. The sinus, however, does become wider and bigger, and the fabric was pleated and thrown over the left shoulder, so the styling of the toga was just, the draping of the toga was a little bit easier. So as you can see over here, all these businessmen are wearing the newer fashion of the toga. Especially over here, it's a lot shorter, as you can see over here. And over here, this is Emperor Hadrian. He is wearing the imperial toga, the imperial Augustan toga, and it's a lot longer, a lot more voluminous. The reason why he is still depicted wearing them, or emperors are still wearing the more Augustan toga, is because it's a lot more grander. He is shown as being the emperor, better than everybody, so he has to wear the more uncomfortable toga. And then there's a toga cantabulata. I've taken Latin for 10 years. I should know how to pronounce all of this. The toga cantabulata, it is actually a new name coined by modern historians for this type of toga. It has a pleated band on the front, and this was either like a separate thing or just sewn or attached onto the toga. It is a very complicated drape that I have tried genuinely to research and to explain. I will show you guys an image of it, of like what it actually looks like on full length, not somewhere. It is mind-boggling. There's like physics involved. There is like geometry in that I don't even know. And this is probably the reason why togas became more and more of a ceremonial garment over time, because it's just way too hard to drape that and to wear it constantly, like every single day. Oh yeah, I forgot to put a meme in here, but that's fine. But that's why the panuela, which is a cloak-like garment, became more and more common and popular. So this was first seen in the Punic Wars, but it was only worn by lower classes and slaves. However, it became a more upper-class garment in the 3rd century AD. It replaces the toga as an official garment. So as we see over here, this is a Justinian law passed in 382 AD. It shows it makes it official that the panuela can be worn as everyday garments for the senators, but when they're in office, they wear the toga. When they're in like the Senate House, they have to wear the toga. Yeah. The stola, however, was worn basically until the Flavian dynasty, and it's still seen in artwork until the 3rd and 4th century AD. However, it just kind of just disappears out of fashion completely because tunics are more worn, which we'll get into in a sec. And a little fun tidbit, it was worn unbelted, mostly starting until in 40 AD. Yeah. Just let me know when you're finished with the photo. You're good with the photo? Yes. So the tunic, it is the most common garment in all classes. It is what is worn mostly by everybody. The toga, the stola are more worn by the middling and upper classes or by ceremonial garments, but the tunic is still worn by everybody. Long tunics that reach the ankles and wrists are more appropriate for women. Short tunics are more appropriate for men. Ionic tunics are more, or Ionic chittins are still seen by the Roman people in portraiture and art. And as you can see by all these lovely drawings. And yeah, that is kind of what was worn by most people. Clavi, which are the bands of the tunics, are the most common. Thank you, Hannah, for laughing. Are the most common decoration on Roman tunics. So it was thought that clavies were regulated by law and class. So there's two types, the latus clavi and the Augustus clavi. So the latus clavi was worn by the equestrian classes, and then the Augustus clavi was worn by the senatorial classes. I could be wrong when I say that. However, looking at mummy portraits, so these are portraits of mummies from the 1st century BC to the 3rd century BC. It shows a different picture. These are people who are not of the equestrian class. They're wealthy, but they're not, in Rome, in the Senate. These are just regular everyday people, and we see them wearing the clavi. We see there's like fresco paintings in Pompeii of people just wearing clavi all the time. So it's not something that was regulated by law. It was probably regulated earlier on in the early republic. However, as we have talked about, as Rome going to crap in the 1st century, that probably just did not stick with the Roman people. And it just became more of an everyday thing, everyday decoration. And as time goes on, mostly after the 3rd century, we start seeing another development in fashion. So we see other types of tunics coming up. So this is called a dalmatica. It was introduced in the 3rd century CE, and it consists of having long sleeves with a flared hem. And it was worn by both upper class men and women. This is a garment that also becomes the precursor for a lot of Roman Catholic religious garments. So even today, if you go and you see like a Roman Catholic priest, they will be wearing something called a dalmatica, which is a very long robe with a very big sleeves. Very ornate, a lot of gold, a lot of glitz, a lot of glam. Yeah. And then we also have another garment called a coloblium. It's a very loose type of tunic that actually comes like very close to the wrists as it gets closer. And it was worn over a long sleeved garment. And it was also a very common garment that also became popular in the 3rd century. There are depictions of Roman empresses even wearing this type of garment, though it would have been considerably a lot longer. And then for decoration. So according to Gestra, Julianus Augustus in his reign saw the increase of textile decoration. I don't know why that's spelled wrong. So we see more tapestry woven pieces added onto garments. We see more decoration or ornateness added onto tunics. And this influence from the East and influence from the Byzantine Empire, influences from the East and from like the Carthaginian Empire, for the Germanic tribes. And this what brings us into the Byzantine Empire with all of their like heavily woven silk brocades and all of the extra. If you've seen like any like Greek Orthodox churches or like any sort of like any saints from that time in the Greek Orthodox Church, you know what I'm talking about, the ornateness and stuff. And that's it. That is my presentation on Roman fashion. Let me just end the video.